In Northern California, a car crashes down an embankment in the dead of night. Rescue workers scramble to save a couple trapped inside. But the routine investigation takes an unexpected twist when details about the victims are revealed. Not far away, in Palo Alto, a woman is found dead at the bottom of the basement stairs. As detectives look into the accident, they begin to question the sequence of events. Sometimes, first impressions mask the truth. A tragic accident, a happy marriage, a solid alibi. In the face of murder, all these come under scrutiny. To solve the demanding cases, investigators must sift through the debris of shattered vows. In this episode, some of the names have been changed. El Dorado County, California, the Golden Country, where traffic is light and barely lit roads are the norm. On October 27th, 1992, one of those roads offered up a deadly turn. Around 8 p.m., a man driving alone noticed swerving headlights in his rearview mirror and heard a crash. When he looked back, the car was gone. Fearing that someone was seriously injured, he turned around and pulled off to the side of the road. He saw the vehicle at the bottom of the embankment. He ran down to help. The woman sat motionless. Her companion sat dazed and in pain.
Fire emergency.
A car went over the embankment.
Are there people injured?
Yeah, there's 2 people inside, and I think the driver's dead. The other guy's hurt real bad.
Units from the Folsom Fire Department raced to the scene. Officers from the California Highway Patrol and other emergency personnel moved quickly to rescue the victims. Rescue workers carrying equipment helped each other down the steep embankment. Paramedics confirmed the woman was dead. The passenger identified himself as Mitch McLeese. He said he couldn't move his legs. Paramedics suspected internal injuries. When asked about the accident, he said he couldn't remember much. He told them he was a friend of the woman who was driving. Her driver's license identified her as Susan Moyer, a 52-year-old woman from El Dorado.
We're gonna help you out. We have to get you out of this car first, okay? Just try to relax.
McLeese said he must have fallen asleep. When he woke up, they were in the ditch. Paramedics rushed the passenger to Sacramento Medical Center for treatment. A deputy from the El Dorado Sheriff's Department arrived at Susan Moyer's home around 11 p.m. He told Ken Moyer his wife had been killed in a car accident. The officer asked questions, gathering information about Ken's wife, Susan, and her passenger, Mitch McLeese. Moyer said McLeese was one of his employees. He also told him that McLeese helped them move to California from Sarasota, Florida.
Today, so I can just start in the kitchen tomorrow?
Ken and Susan were newlyweds, and McLeese stayed on to do some work in their new home. That evening, Moyer had to leave for an appointment around 7:15 and couldn't take McLeese back to his hotel.
Okay, all right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Susan offered to drive him when he was done.
Hey, Mitch.
Gentleman that was with
Moyer
you
said when he returned home around 8:30, Susan still wasn't home, and he began to worry. He drove around searching for her. Moyer told the deputy he blamed himself for the accident. He said if he'd taken McLeese home, Susan would still be alive.
No, I left.
The next day, an autopsy was performed. X-rays revealed the victim's 4th and 5th cervical vertebrae had been fractured and dislocated. Susan Moyer had broken her neck. The victim's eyes were black and swollen, indicating Susan's head hit the steering wheel on impact. According to police reports, the car had rolled down the steep embankment. The coroner determined her injuries were consistent with the accounts. The death was ruled accidental. Susan's body was released to her husband. She was cremated and her remains sent to her hometown of Sarasota, Florida, for burial. Police are required to investigate all traffic fatalities and went to the hospital to follow up on passenger Mitch McLeese.
Do you mind if I actually take a look at that?
But the nurse informed the officer that McLeese wouldn't let the doctors perform any tests and had checked himself out hours earlier.
A few hours ago, he left a couple friends.
Against doctor's orders. At the El Dorado Sheriff's Office, Lieutenant Jim Roloff had questions. The only witness to the accident had left town, and it seemed suspicious.
Our seriously injured victim, who was supposedly in the hospital dying, has checked out and gone home to Washington, the state of Washington. So, at that point, things started not looking too good.
Lieutenant Roloff reviewed the autopsy report for anything out of the ordinary. He found nothing. But all that was about to change.
Lieutenant Roloff.
Hi, this is Detective Beecham from the Sarasota.
In Sarasota, Florida, a detective from the Special Investigations Unit relayed information to Lieutenant Roloff from Susan Moyer's family. She said they didn't believe her death was an accident. Florida investigators told Roloff they conducted a preliminary background check into the Moyers.
Going to do a reconstruction on this.
They discovered Susan was recently awarded a $3.7 million settlement when her first husband was killed in a small plane crash. According to family members, Ken Moyer came into her life shortly after she received the money. This information raised suspicions.
Yeah.
Roloff and his team decided to re-examine the accident.
The first thing that had to be established is, how did this woman die? And was it, in fact, as a result of injuries suffered in the accident, or was it from some other means?
California Highway Patrol's major accident investigation team, known as MATE, was called in to help find an answer. At the scene, the investigators reconstructed the accident.
The next one?
They measured the slope of the embankment and the length of the tire tracks to learn exactly how the car ended up in the ditch. Paul Whiting headed the investigation.
We get an approximate speed of the vehicle, the amount of time that it took for it to come to a stop, From that, we can calculate the forces, the approximate forces that the vehicle experienced as it dissipated its energy coming to a stop.
Broken branches would also help gauge the force of the car's descent. The greater the damage, the harder and faster the car tumbled. Though the trees showed scars of the accident, Whiting and his team found that the damage was minimal.
We determined there simply wasn't enough force generated to the vehicle and thus to the occupants of the vehicle to produce the deadly injuries that she received.
The investigation team now needed to closely examine the car, which had been towed to the impound lot the night of the accident. Paul Whiting was puzzled. He found the car's condition particularly unusual.
We could find no significant damage to the interior of the car. We checked the steering wheel. It wasn't bent in any direction. There was no marks in the dashboard. The pedals were all intact. There was nothing on the interior of the car that would have suggested a significant human impact with any of those structures.
Investigators checked for blood or fibers to determine if Susan Moyer or her passenger had hit the windshield. No evidence was found in the glass. Whiting concluded the glass shattered from the stress of the collision and not because one of the passengers hit their heads on the windshield. The exterior of the car also showed little serious impact.
The damage to the left front is the only damage that is significant at all. At the most, it would represent a speed change of 10 miles an hour. Now, the forces in a 10-mile-an-hour speed change would be comparable to backing into a light post from a parked position. So it's not the kind of forces that we would expect to see fractured necks or death-producing injuries from.
Whiting and his team found no evidence the car had rolled over or that it was involved in a serious accident. Lieutenant Roloff read the mate report and grew more skeptical.
I got a favor. As you start down this road, everything you're developing says that this accident is not what it appears to be.
Authorities now believed Susan Moyer's death was not an accident. But proving it would not be easy. Susan's body had been cremated and all physical evidence of her death destroyed. In El Dorado, California, Susan Moyer was found dead at the scene of a car crash. After reconstructing the accident, investigators now believed she was murdered. And they discovered there was a possible motive. Police grew suspicious after they learned the victim's new husband stood to inherit almost $4 million upon her death. Detective Sergeant Hal Lamb of the Homicide Division discussed the mate findings with Lieutenant Jim Roloff.
They were telling us that the forces involved in this accident weren't sufficient to cause the broken neck.
Because Susan Moyers had been cremated, Detective Sergeant Lamb had to rely on the original autopsy report and details observed at the scene.
Fortunately, the night of the accident, we had a sheriff's corner investigator that had gone out and took a series of photographs of Susan inside of the vehicle, and so we had those to work with.
The photographs revealed the position of the body, blood patterns on the victim's face, and bruising around the eyes. Armed with this new information, investigators turned to the Sacramento Forensic Services Department and Chief Medical Examiner Gregory Schmunk. He reviewed the reports, photographs, and eyewitness accounts of emergency personnel at the scene.
The description that there was bruising around both of the eyes within seconds to minutes after the accident, as described by the paramedic on the scene, would be very unusual. It takes some time for that bruising to occur because the blood has to seep through those soft tissues. That indicated to me that the death had occurred prior to her driving off the road.
The photographs also showed dried blood patterns on the victim's face. These blood stains ran down the side of the victim's face toward her ear. But the effects of gravity after the accident should have made the blood drip down the front of her face.
The blood pattern on the body was not consistent with the way she was positioned in the vehicle.
Schmuck closely examined the autopsy report in light of the California Highway Patrol's analysis of the accident.
There was a fracture of the mid-neck that was inconsistent with any type of fracture that I'd ever seen in a motor vehicle accident, such as the type that Susan was in. There was no rollover, there was no significant impact. So the location of the fracture was unusual for that type of incident. I'd concluded that the fracture of the neck and therefore the cause of Susan Moyer's death was not due to a motor vehicle accident.
Now they needed to find out exactly how this woman died and who wanted her dead.
It's worth it, though, I think.
They turned to her husband, Ken Moyer, and the only survivor of the crash, Mitch McLeese. But McLeese had abruptly left town after the accident. And Ken Moyer had returned to his home in Florida, where he owned a sporting goods store. Police spoke to those closest to the couple. They were hoping to find out more about their relationship. Close friend Kyle Dallinger lived nearby.
Hey, thanks a lot.
Kyle told police Ken Moyer was distraught the day after the accident.
Sir, what are you doing?
Moyer asked him if he would drive him to the hospital to pick up his friend Mitch McLeese, who was checking out. The neighbors said he saw Ken Moyer hand McLeese a plane ticket.
Yeah, I overheard a phone
He was
call.
told Mitch McLeese was not going home, but relocated to a small town outside of Seattle.
Did he make any comments to you about this?
Given this new information, the police were beginning to uncover a murderous plot.
Perhaps you should leave town and take a vacation.
We really felt that Ken Moyer was the brains behind this whole thing. We thought that it was a homicide for money at that point, and we felt that Mitch McLeese was just a hired hand.
Detectives went to Washington to interview McLeese. When detectives identified themselves, he was shaken.
Yeah, actually, we're detectives from El Dorado County Sheriff's Department. I'm Detective Hal Lamb. This is Detective Bill Wilton. We're here to talk to you about the accident you were involved in with Susan Moyer.
McLeese stuck to the story that Susan was driving and he had fallen asleep. He said he woke up just as the car plunged down the embankment and didn't know what caused the accident.
Yeah?
That's been bothering me still, actually.
Because of everything they had uncovered, detectives knew they weren't getting the whole story.
And obviously Susan can't tell us what happened. He was lying.
I don't remember anything else.
There's no question that he was lying. But we didn't really have enough physical evidence to arrest him at that time.
They needed more. So Lieutenant Roloff sent detectives to Sarasota, the Moyers' hometown, to talk to the people who knew them best.
I made a list of some individuals that I feel want some further questioning.
They met the local investigators who had been gathering information about the Moyers and their employee, Mitch McLeese. The detectives learned about an affair Ken Moyer was having with a woman by the name of Betty Ann Brown. Detectives interviewed Brown, who admitted she'd been seeing Ken for the last 2 years.
I know he was very upset.
She was shocked when she heard he was getting married.
And I'm being interviewed
but he assured her that his marriage would not interfere with their relationship.
This card's okay?
Absolutely.
And Ken Moyer kept seeing Betty Ann on a regular basis.
Don't you want that? Yeah. Once, I believe.
She admitted that they'd had an intimate encounter just before the wedding. The day of the funeral, they had an intimate encounter after the funeral, and she even gave us the location and the time of the motel that she met with him.
Detectives began interviewing employees at Ken's sporting goods store. And it seemed as if everyone had a similar story to tell. According to everyone who knew him, Ken's marriage to Susan was not about love.
We learned from all the people that we had interviewed that it was apparent that Ken Moyer had married Susan for her money, and that Ken really didn't care for Susan.
I asked him.
He had told one of his employees, it was a question-answer thing, Eddie, do you know why someone gets married? And Eddie says, for love, and Ken says, no, it's for money.
Police now had a clear motive, but the crime and the crime scene still remained unclear. They now believed the accident was staged to cover up Susan's murder. But linking Ken Moyer and Mitch McLeese to the killing would take more than motive. It would take proof in the form of forensic evidence. California detectives began investigating an accident, but ended up uncovering a murder. They believed Ken Moyer had paid one of his employees to kill his wife, Susan. Although the circumstantial evidence was compelling, they had no physical proof. Investigators Lamb and Roloff now believed they knew how Susan had died, but they still had no direct evidence to prove that Moyer or McLeese had killed her.
Go over, take a look at it, and see where we want to go from there.
Okay.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
4 months after the crash, a newspaper article prompted a local handyman to contact police. The worker told detectives Ken Moyer had hired him to regrout some tiles in his foyer.
First layer, it wouldn't be a problem, and just relay everything, but he wanted the grout and everything taken out, completely redone.
Okay, Chuck, here's the spots I want you
Moyer explained that he'd spilled cherry cough medicine, and it had penetrated the grout. The worker told Moyer that he didn't need to replace the grout, just scrape and regrout the stained portions.
all the way to the cement. All this grout out, this whole section here.
Just because I was concerned about it. So
And Mr. Moyer insisted that he remove all the grout and replace it all. And he told us that as he was removing that grout, that Mr. Moyer was sitting there with a vacuum, vacuuming up the stained grout.
He described precisely where the tiles were located. Since the tiles were porous, he felt confident that some of the red stains still remained.
This is the area by the door that we're really concerned with. The tile guy, this is the area that he came in and pointed out to us. Some area right in here.
Police obtained a warrant to search the Moyers' house. Faye Ann Springer, a criminalist for Sacramento County, examined the tiles for bloodstains. A preliminary examination revealed no outward signs of blood.
Okay, I think what we'll do is we'll spray in this area first and then work our way down towards the door.
Working systematically, Springer sprayed the area with a chemical called fluorescein, which glows in the presence of minute quantities of blood.
Oh, we're getting a little weak reaction in a couple of places here. It doesn't identify blood, it only gives you areas of interest. And there were at least 2 areas of interest in the entryway. What we did then is request that those tiles be actually physically removed because the amount of blood was not visible to the eye, so we wanted to look at the sides of the tile to see if blood may have seeped between the actual ceramic tiles and in through the grout.
The tiles were brought to the lab and did in fact test positive for blood. Springer then had to determine whether or not it was Susan Moyer's. And she wasn't sure this could be done.
The amount of material was marginal for testing. It's very difficult to test bloodstains that are in grout or cement, but I thought there might be enough present on the tiles that they could get enough material, DNA material, out of it.
Springer was right. The sample did contain enough DNA for testing. A comparison to the victim's DNA proved the blood on the tiles was Susan Moyer's. On March 27, 1993, Ken Moyer was arrested in Sarasota, Florida, and returned to California. Investigators pieced together the events that led to Susan's murder. Ken Moyer had courted and married her for money. After the wedding, he moved her to California, far away from loved ones who would ask too many questions. Moyer then enlisted Mitch McLeese and gave him money to help him carry out the murder. On the night of October 27, 1992, McLeese crept up behind the unsuspecting victim and broke her neck. The force of the break caused her nose to bleed and blood to spatter on the floor. Her death was instant. Detectives believe Ken Moyer helped McLeese put his wife's body into the car.
And I think that Mitch McLeese sat in the passenger seat and reached over and steered the vehicle and probably operated the gas with his left foot.
Ken Moyer was convicted of the first-degree murder of Susan Moyer. He was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Mitch McLeese was also convicted of first-degree murder and received an identical sentence. Some killers will go to great lengths to hide their true nature and conceal their crimes. But in Palo Alto, California, it is the secret itself that unmasks a killer. Palo Alto is an affluent bedroom community of San Francisco in the heart of Silicon Valley. This quiet area can offer a sense of security and a refuge away from urban life. But sometimes danger is closer than it looks.
911 emergency.
On May 5th, 2000, police dispatch received a 911 call. A woman had fallen down the stairs and was not breathing. The dispatcher alerted the Palo Alto police and the rescue squad, who raced to the scene. Moments later, police arrived at the residence of Mary Ann and William Slater. Despite all the rescue efforts, it was too late.
That's all we got.
Mary Ann Slater could not be resuscitated.
251 dispatch. Go ahead and dispatch me a coroner and a detective at this location.
Two classes today. There's one at 10:20.
Detective Mike Denson spoke with the victim's husband. William Slater told the investigator that nothing unusual happened that day.
I thought she might still be.
He said after their morning jog, Mary Ann left around 10 o'clock to teach a piano class. And he left the house an hour later to survey a new building site.
Okay. Have a good day.
He stayed at the site until 1 p.m.
For work,
When he left to meet some friends for lunch, William said he received a call from his wife's work.
I came back to the house. Hello?
She had not shown up for her second
Oh,
class.
that's strange. She was at home when I left. Did you try her cell phone?
He grew concerned and called home several times, but there was no answer.
Told me that that she had.
William also told Detective Denson it was not unusual for Marianne to go home in between classes.
There she was at the bottom of the stairs.
When he returned home,
I ran
he discovered
down.
the tragic accident.
Music teacher.
He said that he looked down the stairs and she was laying on the stairs and was not responsive. He told me that he believed that she had fallen down the stairs, and he noticed that she was wearing these particular shoes, and he knew that she had fallen in those shoes previously. And so he speculated that she was carrying something down the stairs, tripped on the shoes and fell down the stairs.
By all accounts, it looked like a terrible accident.
She'd fallen down the stairs, pronounced her dead.
Marianne, home alone, had tripped, hit her head, and died.
Blood on the bell up there, on the steps, and other places. So. And she is not.
An initial assessment of the scene indicated that the victim appeared to have been doing laundry when she fell. Like all unattended deaths, Marianne Slater's body was sent to the coroner's lab for autopsy. Assistant Medical Examiner Coroner Diane Vertis performed the examination and quickly became suspicious.
See this? See the neck?
Well, initially we looked for injuries consistent with the story that she fell down a flight of stairs. What we found was much different than what we were led to believe.
The external examination revealed 7 separate wounds to all different parts of the head.
What's very important about this is that these lacerations were not consistent with a single event. They were much more consistent with multiple blows to the head.
And you can feel the crest skull fracture.
What about the neck?
We also did find some injuries on the hands, and the injuries on the hands were more consistent with what we call defensive wounds.
Okay, we got a 1/4-inch laceration there. Yeah.
The evidence suggested Marianne Slater was beaten to death while trying to fend off her attacker. An internal examination revealed additional injuries to Marianne's neck.
There were signs of strangulation. This, of course, was completely contrary to a simple fall down the stairs. This is something that we saw some signs of externally and became more evident on the internal exam.
Dr. Vertis called in Dr. Gregory Schmunk, the chief medical examiner coroner for Santa Clara County.
I first became involved at the investigation on a Friday evening when I got a phone call from one of my investigators that a woman had fallen downstairs. I told her to proceed as usual with her investigation. And the next thing that I heard about the case was when I heard the autopsy findings, that those autopsy findings were not consistent with a fall down the stairs.
After reviewing the crime scene photographs, Dr. Schmunk agreed with Dr. Vertis' findings that Marianne's injuries did not occur from falling.
That examination made me conclude that the majority of the blows to the back of the head were not with a striking object, but were more likely the head being impacted against a straight surface or possibly a right-angled surface.
Marianne Slater's death was no accident. This was murder. In Palo Alto, Marianne Slater was found dead in her house from what appeared to be an accidental fall. But an autopsy revealed injuries inconsistent with this initial assessment. It now looked as though Marianne was beaten and strangled. Detective Mike Denson of the Palo Alto Police Department believed a recent rash of burglaries in the neighborhood might provide a possible scenario.
Over the last 6 months, there had been several residential burglaries in the Southgate neighborhood. That was a consideration of mine as I began this investigation.
He checked previous reports of burglaries. Denson theorized the burglar might have been surprised by Marianne and killed her.
That's what I came up with also.
To test the theory, investigators secured a search warrant and returned to the house. They checked the exterior perimeter, looking for signs of a break-in. There were no signs of forced entry. Inside the house, forensic examiners needed to pinpoint the exact location of her death. They started with the basement steps. Forensic technicians used the chemical luminol to locate the presence of blood. If Marianne had actually fallen and hit her head, there would be a definite pattern of blood. There wasn't any spatter on the stairs at all. From the basement, they backtracked and examined other parts of the house.
Sarge, I didn't see any blood spatter.
Since the basement door opened into the kitchen, they began there.
We found some blood spatter and some dilute blood stain in the kitchen of the house. I knew at that time that we were going to have to do luminol to bring up a cleaned up crime scene, and so that was our next course of action, was to bring the luminol experts in to spray for luminol and detect blood stain.
If a room hid a bloody secret, luminol would find it. And in this case, it did exactly that. Someone had tried to cover up a violent act. Chief Medical Examiner Gregory Schmunk.
The luminol test revealed that there was extensive blood throughout the house, especially that kitchen and an adjacent bathroom. It looked like there had been a primary crime scene in the kitchen where she had been assaulted, and then the assailant had later gone to the bathroom and probably washed up.
There was a huge amount of blood discovered, and no amount of cleaning could hide it. The kitchen floor glowed with the telltale signs of murder. Upon closer examination of the glow patterns, a partial left shoe print emerged. Marianne Slater had been killed in the kitchen, and her body moved to the bottom of the stairs afterward. A burglar would have no reason to clean up a crime scene and stage a murder to look like an accident. Marianne probably knew her killer. As a matter of routine, police needed to rule out Marianne's husband, William, as a suspect. They first checked his alibi, starting with his phone calls.
Do a photo, so I'd like you to photograph each of the calls that were received in this box, collect it, and then collect this address book for me as well.
Got it.
Thank you.
Hoping for anything that might lead to a break in the case, investigators collected the caller ID box from the Slaters' telephone, along with Marianne's address book. At the State Crime Lab, a DNA profile was made from the blood found in the Slaters' kitchen. The profile was then compared to DNA extracted from Marianne's body during autopsy. To no one's surprise, they matched. Police canvassed the Slaters' neighborhood to see if anyone had witnessed anything suspicious on the day of the murder. One neighbor told Sergeant Denson that a silver truck blocked the alleyway behind the Slater house around 12:30 that day.
It was about noon.
She paid particular attention to that vehicle because it was wide enough and the street was narrow enough that it made it uneasy for her to get around it. So she noticed it and made a mental note of it at that time.
She couldn't go anywhere for half an hour. Police knew William Slater drove a silver truck.
In the house all day?
This would indicate that William was actually in the neighborhood at the time of the murder, not at the work site as he had told detectives earlier. An officer searched the construction area for any evidence or anyone who could corroborate William's story. He found nothing. Across the street, the officer noticed a driving range that had a fairly good view of the vacant lot. He questioned the clerk at the golf club to see if she had seen anyone over there on the day in question. The clerk said that she knew William, and although she was working that afternoon, she hadn't seen him or anyone else there. Detective Denson looked closer at the rest of William's story. The Slaters' caller ID registered a call from Marianne's work and several calls from William's cell phone. Denson tracked the location of the calls.
When you turn a cell phone on or hit send to make a call, the cell phone will search for the strongest signal or the closest cell site to put the call through. Since he was telling me he was on 101 at Woodside Road, he theoretically should have been hitting a cell site close to that location. In fact, he was hitting a cell site that was close to his house.
It looked as if police could not eliminate William Slater as a murder suspect. His alibi was falling apart. Police believed the man who just a few days ago seemed like the grieving widower
Just as we were looking around,
was actually a killer.
on the bell up there, on the steps.
But to prove it, investigators knew they needed to physically link him to the accident. Palo Alto investigators believed William Slater had staged an accident to cover up the murder of his wife. Now they had to prove it. The autopsy revealed that Marianne had been beaten and strangled, and William's alibi had fallen apart. But he didn't appear to have a motive. By all accounts, the Slaters were happy. They recently celebrated their 25th anniversary and had 2 children together. To learn more, Detective Denson called Marianne's friends and family.
My intention was to call all the friends that I could discover in the address book and see if I could find potential motive. And I was just calling up and asking them if they could think of anything that would help with the investigation. And ultimately found a friend that was aware of an affair that occurred some 20 years ago.
Edward Dale had been a friend of Marianne's for most of her life.
Hi, how you doing, sir? This is Sergeant Mike Denson with Palo Alto Police Department.
Denson interviewed Dale about his relationship with Marianne and William.
About 15 years.
He told the detective he had an affair with Marianne. During the time of the affair, Marianne became pregnant with Dale's son. William Slater raised the boy as his own, never suspecting he was not the father of the child. The last time Dale saw Marianne, she told him she planned to reveal their secret to her son on his graduation day.
You to know that.
Dale said he was relieved. The secret had gone on too long. The family secret provided police with a possible motive. And Detective Denson did a little more digging.
I did a thorough investigation using the FBI Financial Analyst Unit in Virginia, and I had them do the full financial records check.
He learned the Slaters had money problems, and their finances were dwindling away.
He was doing his own business, but it was not bringing in very much income, so we basically found them to be broke.
Denson learned through friends that Marianne was not aware of their financial problems. William Slater seemed to have many secrets, but investigators still had no physical evidence linking him to murder. Police obtained a search warrant to examine the vehicle he had been driving the day his wife was killed. The truck was impounded, and forensic technicians scoured the interior for evidence. stashed underneath the front seat was a T-shirt. A stain that appeared to be blood was discovered. The shirt was bagged and marked as evidence. A search of the back seat revealed a pair of athletic shoes. The technician noticed several red smudges on them. The items were sent to the state crime lab for analysis. Samples from the stains on both the shoes and the shirt tested positive for human blood. To determine whose blood it was, DNA was extracted from the samples, following careful procedure to avoid contamination of the evidence. A computer-aided comparison was made between the samples and the DNA of the victim, Marianne Slater. They matched. But a small amount of blood might not hold up in court and could possibly be explained away. A print expert examined the left shoe found in William's truck to see if it matched the tread pattern found on the print in Slater's kitchen. After the shoe was inked, a sample print was carefully made and a transparency was created. A comparison revealed both prints had identical tread and matching wear patterns. The prints were made by the shoes in the truck. It was the break police needed. On May 19, 2000, 2 weeks after the murder of his wife, police arrested William Slater. Although he initially denied any involvement, after several hours of questioning, William confessed to killing his wife. He flew into a rage after his wife revealed her infidelity. At first, he tried to strangle her, but when she fought back, he kicked her to death. He then placed her body at the foot of the basement stairs to stage the accident. And returned to clean up the blood in the kitchen.
His life was shaken to the max, and I believe that he killed her as a result of that. In addition, they were financially unstable at this point, and his whole life was about to change or changing.
William Slater was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Killers who are closest to their victims often believe they can cover up their crimes and fool investigators. But more often, forensic evidence is discovered, unmasking the deceit and bringing the perpetrators to justice. In Northern California, a fire rages in the middle of the night. A woman's charred body is discovered in the smoldering aftermath. But how she turned up dead remains a mystery. Detectives turn to forensic science in the hopes of uncovering the answers to their many questions. When investigators start sifting through the ashes, they have no idea it will lead to a trail of deception. This is a case of out-and-out lies, and not one, but two cold-blooded murders. When people trust their killer with their secrets, their money, and their lives, it can very well turn out to be a tragic case of misplaced loyalty. this episode, some of the names have been changed. The city of Berkeley, California is well known for its hippie counterculture and bohemian lifestyle. Nestled in the rolling hills just across the bridge from San Francisco, it's a magnet for people of all walks of life. Criminals can hide in plain sight, making it a perfect place to cover up an insidious crime. In the early morning hours of June 25th, 1994, a loud explosion rocked the home of James Hutchings. It was 4 in the morning, and his next-door neighbor, Virginia Bailey's house, was on fire. He rushed to call the fire department, but took consolation in the knowledge that Bailey was out of town.
Yeah, there's a fire. My neighbor's house is on fire. Yes, 2912.
Do you know who lives there? Virginia Bailey? Is she at home right now? She's out of town. Okay, we're sending the fire department. We're on the way. Thank you.
Dispatchers immediately dispatched the Berkeley Fire Department to the scene. Firefighters rushed to what they thought was an unoccupied home. When they arrived, shooting flames were visible through the window. Working deliberately for several hours, the firemen extinguished the fire. Firefighters entered the house to make sure the fire was out. They noticed the majority of the damage from the blaze was in the dining room. Deputy Fire Marshal Wayne Inouye was on the scene.
When I got on the scene, I found a 2-story residential dwelling. I went into the first floor, and the first floor wasn't that badly damaged. I proceeded up to the second floor, and that's where the majority of the fire damage was. There was a lot of smoke damage on the second floor, and in the dining room, there was heavy fire damage.
Hey Chuck, shine your light in there. Over to the right. What is that? Body. Is it a body?
It was there they made a shocking discovery. A body lying face down in the smoldering debris, clearly dead.
We've got a confirmed 8900 in this location. Notify the fire marshals. Better get the coroner started up this way.
They also noticed something odd about the scene. The room was virtually without furniture, and the body was found 6 feet from the fireplace. When firefighters discover a body, they are required to notify the coroner's office. Coroner technicians arrived on the scene. They noticed the victim had severe burns on both her head and her hands. James Hutchings was shocked to learn that his neighbor might have perished in the fire.
I heard a huge explosion. Heard an explosion?
He knew Virginia was supposed to be in Salt Lake City for a wedding. And if she were home, he wondered why her car was not in the driveway.
When you looked out the window, did you see anybody out there? No. Anybody running from the house?
Nope, just flames.
How about
flames? A lot of smoke.
With what they learned from the neighbor, investigators now turned to science to piece together the events that led to a tragic outcome. An autopsy was performed at the State Crime Lab in Berkeley, California. Even though Virginia Bailey was reportedly out of town, forensic experts identified the body using X-rays. The victim was Virginia Bailey. She was home at the time of the fire. But other evidence quickly deemed the exam anything but routine. Upon looking at the body, the first thing the ME noticed was severe decomposition, a finding inconsistent with the person who supposedly just died.
I think I'd like to look at the x-rays. We're going to do, so we're going to this up right here.
Even more telling were maggots found in the chest cavity and on the clothing of the corpse. Maggots usually take somewhere between 24 to 48 hours to appear, and do so only on dead bodies. But there could be no logical reason they would appear on the charred body of a fire victim so soon after her death. Dr. Paul Herman of the coroner's office reviewed the autopsy results and examined the photographs.
There was something peculiar about this case because there was evidence of decomposition of the body, even to the point that there were some maggots present on the body and in the clothing, indicating that this person had died long before this fire had occurred.
Since the autopsy revealed the presence of maggots, entomologist Jeffrey Wells was brought in to help establish time of death. Due to their size, he was able to determine that Bailey died at least 3 days before she appeared to be killed in the fire.
If you estimate the age of a maggot found on a body, this gives you a pretty good minimum time since death. The reason for this is flies almost never deposit their eggs or larvae on a live person. Almost always the person must be dead when that happens. If I can estimate the age of a maggot, that gives me a minimum time since death. For example, if I pluck a maggot off of a corpse and I am pretty sure that it is 3 days old, almost certainly that person has been dead for at least 3 days.
Dr. Wells definitively concluded that Virginia Bailey didn't die in the fire. Investigators' worst fears were coming to light. The case was now a criminal matter, and at the Berkeley Police Department, Inspector Al Bierce was assigned the file. Things clearly didn't add up, and Bierce needed to find out what or who had killed Virginia Bailey.
If she had died naturally, it would have been impossible for this fire to have occurred as a natural outgrowth of her death. For example, if she was walking across the room with some kind of a material and then suffered a heart attack, fell, started the fire, there wasn't going to be any decomposition there.
Bierce's first move was to meet with the victim's brother, who had some questions of his own. They began to create a timeline leading up to Virginia's death.
When was the last time that you talked to her by phone?
He hadn't heard from his sister for weeks before the fire.
He always got a call from his sister on his birthday. He didn't get a call. That was totally out of character for her.
Virginia and her brother were extremely close and had recently attended a friend's wedding.
Hello there. I just want both of you to know that I love
Her brother believed that something didn't sit right about his sister's disappearance.
see that both of you are just made for each other.
He said the two usually spoke all the time, yet he had left messages on her answering machine and heard nothing back from her. Virginia's brother told Inspector Bierce that Christine Lloyd, Virginia's financial advisor, had been house-sitting for his sister. He also told him that some of Virginia's furniture was missing from her house.
That's all I've got for now. I know where you are down at the motel.
Inspector Bierce was faced with many questions. He was at the beginning of a complicated investigation. Bierce needed to uncover evidence to find out if someone had killed Virginia Bailey and tried to make it look like an accidental fire death.
What is that over there? You see how it goes around before it starts
And
to draw
perhaps
like
what
that?
he was looking for was buried in the ashes of the fire. A deadly fire ravaged the home of Virginia Bailey, and investigators grew suspicious. After only a preliminary investigation, Berkeley Police Inspector Al Bierce thought he had a murder on his hands. Autopsy reports revealed the presence of maggots on a body found at the scene of the fire. Scientists conclusively proved that Virginia Bailey had already been dead for at least 3 days before the fire started. Inspector Bierce decided to visit the scene of the crime firsthand. When he arrived, the fire investigator pointed out burn patterns.
There's no charring on the wood or anything, so it leads to believe that it didn't start here at the fireplace.
Things did not add up.
So this will be real important that we get this done.
They noticed evidence of pore patterns near the body.
Did we come in with a sniffer that night?
This would indicate the presence of an accelerant.
It was poured over the body.
And perhaps the most telling sign, the body was discovered over 6 feet from the fireplace.
I'm seeing it right here. Right
If the fire began in the fireplace, there should be burn marks that led to the body. There were none. The area directly surrounding the body was suspiciously intact. The investigator believed this was arson. He hoped those closest to Virginia could provide him with information as to how and why she died in the fire. He asked Christine Lloyd, the victim's financial advisor and best friend, to meet him there. She was house-sitting for Virginia.
You were coming into the house. You said you came in. Any irregularities?
When Christine Lloyd arrived, she told Inspector Bierce she and Virginia were close friends, and she had been her financial advisor for about 10 years.
Everything seemed normal. But there was something else that I needed to share.
Christine was watching the house while Virginia was in San Francisco the week before the fire.
It was pretty much in place at the time.
But she said she never saw Virginia's body in the dining room.
Something else that I needed to share.
Christine said she went back to the house right after the fire. She and a friend were there trying to rescue Virginia's items from the burned house. It was then they saw something in the downstairs apartment that Virginia usually rented. Christine said this was unusual because the apartment was vacant. She showed Bierce what she had found in the downstairs rental unit. Christine said she was worried that someone had been staying downstairs.
Before the fire.
Before
She told the detective she noticed something disturbing about the condition of the rental apartment's refrigerator.
Oh my God.
Whoa.
How did this happen?
Christine Lloyd pointed out the refrigerator, and she said that just a week before, it had been totally clean and the shelves had been inside. When she showed it to me, the shelves were out of it, and there was a residue on the bottom of the refrigerator, suggestive of the fact that something had been stored there. And she was telling me that nothing had been stored there the last time she had seen it. How many days before the fire were you here?
I was here a couple of days ago.
In the bedroom, Bierce found a terrible mess.
Looks like somebody's been living in here.
There was a mattress on the floor and bottles strewn everywhere.
Look in here. Look at this.
The uninvited resident had left the apartment in disarray. The refrigerator contained what appeared to be a dark liquid residue that looked like blood. To determine what it was, crime technicians performed a luminol test. Also in the refrigerator, what appeared to be a small clump of hair riddled with maggots. Inspector Bierce had the technician remove the hair clump and take a swabbing of the red liquid.
Swab that liquid.
The samples were sent to the lab for further examination. But it was quickly determined that the substance wasn't blood and the hair did not belong to Virginia. And Bierce made another unusual discovery.
Okay.
The smoke detector for the downstairs unit had been unplugged.
Let me get a good shot of it. Good job. Okay.
Get started. This looks pretty staged.
Oh yeah. I went into that room with a very skeptical eye, and it looked staged. That was put there so that somebody would think that somebody had been crashing there, and potentially the person who was crashing there was the person who'd gone upstairs and killed the victim.
Bierce's suspicions continued to grow. Little things about the scene troubled him, like how unusually neat, strategic, and organized the squatter's mess seemed. That despite all the bottles strewn about, there were no bottle caps. There were also no fingerprints on the bottles. To him, the whole scene felt manufactured. Jeffrey Wells examined the hair found in the refrigerator for the presence of maggots. The maggots he found were alive. Types of maggots vary. Those found in the downstairs refrigerator were scuttlefly maggots, different from the flesh fly maggots found on Virginia Bailey's body. The ones in the apartment were insects attracted to rotting food, as well as human remains. All this information troubled Inspector Bierce. But perhaps the most puzzling was the fact that Christine Lloyd said she hadn't seen Virginia's body. After all, she had been dead for at least 3 days. If the body was in the refrigerator, that would support Christine's story. But the science wasn't adding up. If the body was not hidden in the refrigerator, where had it been?
I'm saying, okay, some part of this doesn't make any sense. Either she's aware that the body is there and has played some role in the body being there, or somebody is coming in after the fact and planted the body there. It's not going to make a great deal of sense to me.
Inspector Bierce was beginning to think Christine Lloyd knew more. Perhaps she could shed more light on Virginia's whereabouts before the fire started. He decided to look a little harder at Christine's story. Virginia Bailey was found dead in her Berkeley, California home, and the circumstances surrounding her death were suspicious. The presence of maggots on the body proved she had been dead for some time before the fire. And the story told by the victim's friend, Christine Lloyd, was not adding up.
Come on in, Inspector.
It looked as if Inspector Al Bierce was piecing together a murder.
So how can I help you?
Well, as we talked
The
about
detective met with her to ask her some follow-up questions.
To find out what I can about her habits. She put herself in the house every single day. She put herself into the house as late as 14 hours before the fire. I've got a coroner who's telling me, or who has told me, that the victim's dead for at least 2 days. She's found in an area where Christine Lloyd would have had to have passed through the room within feet of the body to feed the cats and to get the mail. I'm going to leave my card.
It seemed unlikely to Bierce that Virginia could have died of natural causes and lay there for days before the fire ignited.
You can call me or have them call me.
It was time to do some legwork, to learn more about the victim. Bierce began questioning friends and business associates of Virginia's. He started with her co-worker, Mary Cates, who said Virginia wasn't scheduled to go to San Francisco, as Christine had said. Mary also told Inspector Bierce that Virginia had been missing work lately.
Very much out of character, no.
Since this was completely out of character, she said she called Virginia to make sure she was okay. She left a message on her answering machine, but never received a call back from Virginia.
She informed me that...
But said Christine Lloyd called her to tell her Virginia was out of town.
I believe she was at school.
Bierce spoke to several of Virginia's friends, and they all had the same story. When they would call Virginia, they'd get a call back from Christine Lloyd.
Good.
Since Bierce determined Virginia had many friends who were concerned about her whereabouts, he found it odd that no one had actually been able to reach her in the days prior to the fire.
She had missed appointments on the 17th, 18th, and 19th?
That's correct.
One friend, Alicia Jackson, was so concerned she headed over to her house to make sure she was okay. But there was no answer. Only a note on the door saying she was in San Francisco. She thought this was odd, but left her own note, hoping to hear back from her missing friend.
We're obviously
Bierce was puzzled.
hearing from anybody we can.
Although all her friends were being helpful, no one offered anything that gave the investigation focus.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you for coming.
Virginia's brother came back to the police station and offered up a charred piece of evidence. It was Virginia's answering machine, presumably full of messages from concerned friends.
Fire damage to the cassette, pretty well warped.
Inspector Bierce sent the tape to the DOJ crime lab in the hopes of salvaging the burned cassette.
Not sure what we're going to be able to get out.
Perhaps the messages on the machine would lead to answers as to why every time someone tried to make contact with Virginia, they made contact with Christine Lloyd instead.
Be in touch with what we get.
Bierce ran a background check on Christine Lloyd. She came up clean, except for a minor traffic violation. Since Christine was Virginia's financial advisor, Inspector Bierce decided to get a warrant to examine the victim's financial records.
Come on in. Have a seat.
Bierce went to Virginia's bank for answers. Years of experience taught Bierce, study a victim's finances and you'll likely uncover a motive. Virginia's bank activity had reached a fever pitch in the weeks before her death. Large checks were written against Virginia's account, not only to Christine, but also to a woman named Myrtle Lloyd.
About 50% of the proceeds of that account went to Christine Lloyd. 2 days after the fire.
One peculiar thing Bierce noted was a certified foreclosure letter dated the 13th of June. Christine was responsible for making sure all of the bills were paid on time.
Certified mail.
And she had given him no indication that Virginia was in such severe financial trouble.
Card when she opened the bank.
And another red flag. Something that made no sense for a woman who was in dire financial straits and about to lose her home. A flurry of checks written in June. The end of a 6-month spending spree totaling thousands of dollars. In total, 4 checks were made out to Christine and Myrtle Lloyd. Some dated after Virginia's death. Bierce believed he found a motive: embezzlement. Now he needed some kind of smoking gun. Bierce asked Virginia's manager for ATM surveillance tapes at Virginia's bank.
More checks to draw. I will get back to you with...
He also pored over every financial document he could find.
Yeah. Do we have one for bleach and...
And there, among the detailed receipts from Virginia's account, came a startling discovery.
One for $21.36.
Inspector Bierce found receipts for both an accelerant and a garden hose.
Given the date of that purchase and the fact that an accelerant was very possibly used in the ignition of the fire, it provided a nexus between that purchase and the fact that the fire had occurred.
For bleach and...
It looked as if Christine had been using Virginia's account. And the purchase of 2 40-ounce cans of lighter fluid and a hose on her account just days before the fire was quickly turning friend into suspect.
We got the surveillance tapes from the ATM machine.
Oh,
We can put it
Can you hook it up?
on. Yeah.
Bierce's
Let's
next
look at it.
step was to watch the surveillance video provided by Virginia's bank.
Have you queued this up already?
Yeah, this is already queued up.
It contained no surprise. Clear as day, there was Christine Lloyd signing Virginia's checks and deposit slips on checks made out to herself. The checks were in the exact amount of Virginia's missing mortgage payments. One of the checks was dated 3 days before Virginia's death. Yet it was cashed 3 days after her death. It was made out to Myrtle Lloyd. Bierce needed to know who this woman was and if she and Christine were working together to steal Virginia's money. Since their last names were the same, he presumed the two were related. Bierce did a records check on Myrtle Lloyd. What he found out was perhaps the most disturbing thing yet in this perplexing case. Myrtle Lloyd was Christine's mother, and Myrtle Lloyd was dead. It appeared that Christine was not only signing checks on Virginia's account for herself, she was also signing checks made out to a dead woman, her own mother. Bierce visited with the Oakland police, who looked into Myrtle Lloyd's death. He wanted details. Captain Ralph Lacer of the Oakland Police Department remembered her story. He told Bierce that Myrtle had been found dead in her bathtub with severe bruises to her face and lacerations to her head.
And she was doing some financial things for her, and it's looking right now like she was taking...
Because there were no obvious signs of foul play, and police believed Christine's story, the coroner ruled Myrtle's death an accident.
After finding no sign of forced entry in the residence, there was no loss in the residence, or no one appeared to have kind of rummaged through the residence. It came out that we didn't see anything that showed it was a hands of another, and at this point they ruled that it was an accidental death.
Maybe would have come across as an accidental death, but knowing what I
Then Bierce learned that Christine Lloyd had found her mother's body.
That she had seen the mother the day before, and that she had left and done some shopping, and then she was bringing some groceries back to the house.
According to the July 1991 police reports, Christine Lloyd said she returned home from the grocery store.
Hello? What's the grocery store now? Mom?
She was surprised when her mom was nowhere to be found.
Mom? Mom? Mom?
It was when she entered the bathroom that she made the startling discovery of her mother's body. Then, things just clicked for the detective. He instinctively knew he had a second murder on his hands. And he was determined to get the evidence necessary to prove it. While investigating the death of Virginia Bailey,
that was my first impression.
Inspector Al Bierce believed he had uncovered another murder. And he was convinced the same killer committed both crimes. The woman who had been so helpful from the beginning was now a suspect.
At that point in the investigation, I knew that she'd killed my victim in Berkeley, and I knew that she had killed her mother 3 years before. And I knew that she had done a very good job of concealing that death 3 years ago to make it look like an accidental death, not murder.
He was beginning to put it all together, but there were still some unanswered questions. Bierce went to the Oakland coroner's office to find out more. Dr. Paul Herman performed the autopsy on Myrtle Lloyd.
When I walked in the bathroom, I would have expected to find a great deal of blood spattered about in the bathroom because of these injuries to the head.
This was not what he thought he'd find. After all, the victim had severe head wounds. There should have been blood everywhere. But then Dr. Herman saw the smallest of clues. He also noticed more signs that the scene had been meticulously cleaned.
This bathroom was clean. The water had been drained from the tub, and there was some debris from decomposition and probably blood at the bottom of the tub, but no spattering of blood around there at all. And that's what I would have expected to see. And expose the bone. But there are
Myrtle
others that are
Lloyd was
horizontal,
killed
so
by
they
7
obviously
separate
didn't all
lacerations to the back of her
occur,
head.
one way. There had to be either movement of the head
Christine
or
explained that her mother was prone to seizures and said that she had fallen in the bathtub.
And in addition, she had a laceration of her forehead, which
Bierce knew things were not adding up. And after visiting Oakland, his suspicions about Christine escalated. He believed the crime scene was too neat, almost in direct contrast to the scene in Berkeley.
Yeah, they're on both sides, and some of
But both appeared staged nonetheless.
they're crosswise across the back of the head.
To test their suspicions, investigators spoke with Myrtle Lloyd's doctors to determine if she had been ill or had any known conditions that would make her unsteady on her feet.
Physical exams.
What they found out would break the cold case wide open. Myrtle was in excellent health and had no history of seizures. By now, Detective Bierce was convinced of Christine Lloyd's guilt. He was ready to make an arrest. What he needed was a charge. At this point, there was not enough direct evidence to make a murder arrest. Since Christine had signed Virginia Bailey's name on checks, his best bet was forgery. He turned to handwriting expert Verl Truman, a forensic document examiner with the U.S. Postal Inspection Service, and asked him to look at the checks for fraud.
Handwriting examination is basically a side-by-side comparison. The basis for the identification of handwriting is the fact that no two persons share the same combination of individual identifying handwriting characteristics. We look for various features and habits of the writer. We look for the way the person makes beginning strokes, ending strokes, or connecting strokes between letters and letter combinations. We look at things such as the relative height ratio and proportion of letters and in relation to other letters.
He found subtle differences between their handwriting styles, which Truman said were patterns and traits that every individual develops over the years.
Now these characteristics, it's very difficult to cast off your habits when you're either imitating the handwriting of another person or if you're trying to disguise your own writing. Usually some of your habits will still show through.
And Christine was unable to completely disguise hers.
I understand you got something for me. Yes,
But perhaps the most telling sign was not an actual letter or a word,
Notice that she makes a star
but a unique and personal signature symbol.
This one, which I believe is Virginia Bailey used a star as a dollar sign in her writing, and she constructed that character beginning and ending at the lower left corner or 7 o'clock position. Christine Lloyd, on the other hand, did it completely opposite. She began it and started it at the lower right. That was a feature that she just happened to miss.
Inspector Bierce now had proof of forgery. But what he needed was proof of murder. Bierce decided to take another look at the days prior to the fire. Christine was the only one with Virginia's house key, and the only one who seemed to know anything about Virginia's whereabouts. She had even been returning Virginia's phone messages. At the State Crime Lab, technicians worked to restore the message tape from Virginia Bailey's answering machine.
Sticking around, I'll play this.
Investigators were now able to retrieve the messages, although they had no idea what they'd find. By comparing the phone records to the voice messages, Inspector Bierce was able to piece together the chain of events leading up to and following Virginia's murder.
Hey, Virginia, it's me. I haven't heard from you in a while. Where are you? Call me.
The calls reflected a growing concern about Virginia's disappearance on June 13th, 12 days before the fire. And oddly, many of the outgoing calls Bierce found on Virginia's phone records began on that very day.
There was information that came to me during the course of the investigation that suggested that the victim had died on June 13th. That was the last time anybody ever talked to her, and it was the time through phone records that I showed that she had made a call to Christine.
The pieces were falling into place. Bierce felt he was close to being able to make an arrest. He paid a visit to another one of Virginia's neighbors, Sam Watson. Watson told of helping Christine carry a large dining room table, as well as other items from Virginia's house before the fire. She then sold them at a yard sale.
You selling this table too?
Christine had denied having any idea what had happened to that table.
Hello.
Hi, how are you? Good.
I guess it was about 2 days before.
Every part of Christine Lloyd's story seemed suspect. Investigators believed she was in a frenzy of greed, intent on fully taking over her friend's assets through any means possible.
Step towards me, ma'am. Step towards me. Keep walking. Need you to stop. Turn around with your back towards me. Face the house. Face the house.
In early December of 1994, Inspector Al Bierce arrested Christine Lloyd for murder and took her into custody.
Take you over to the car. We'll take you to the car. Do you have any weapons? Do you have knives, guns?
Bierce was convinced that Christine Lloyd had masterminded 2 murders.
Is that Christine?
But he only had enough evidence to bring her in for the murder of Virginia Bailey. He believed she was motivated by money and greed.
You have the right to remain silent. Anything
And he
you say
wanted to see
can-
Christine Lloyd behind bars.
You have the right to an attorney. To have that attorney
Christine
present
Lloyd
when you
refused to
are
speak to police.
You can't afford it.
She refused to take a polygraph test.
Charge. You understand those rights as I.
Instead, she asked for her attorney. She was processed into the system. Although Christine Lloyd was sticking to her guns regarding Virginia Bailey, when asked about her mother, she shook her head and told Bierce he was wrong. She said she was a loving daughter who doted on her mother and would never do anything to harm her. Apparently, Christine Lloyd was convincing. At the time of the arrest, the district attorney's office didn't feel comfortable going ahead and prosecuting the case.
What's your name? Christine.
They didn't feel the evidence was strong enough to get a conviction. Her immediate release was ordered.
Please check and make sure everything is there.
As she walked out of the jail, Inspector Al Bierce despaired.
I knew that she had embezzled from her mother, leading up to the murder of her mother. I knew that she had embezzled from my victim, leading to her murder. And from a personal standpoint, that wasn't something I could let go of.
Convinced he was dealing with a murderer who had already killed twice, Inspector Bierce wasn't about to let it rest.
Yes, you are.
He needed more evidence. He turned to forensic scientists to help him bring this killer to justice. Berkeley County investigator Al Bierce pieced together a story of greed, lies, and murder. He was convinced Christine Lloyd killed both her best friend and her own mother.
Stand back,
Now, despite nearly a year on the case, hundreds of hours of legwork and compelling evidence,
Please check and make sure.
he was watching her go free.
Yes, you are.
I knew she was guilty, and I couldn't let go.
Night, guys. Night, Glenn.
Al Bierce was now working all hours, trying to plug any holes in what he thought was an airtight case against Christine Lloyd.
All right, Al, let's go.
The district attorney's office refused to prosecute the case, stating the evidence was circumstantial and it would not hold up in court. But Al Bierce had worked too hard to let this one slip through his fingers.
By the time I got through, when I was at that point in the investigation, I knew that she'd killed my victim in Berkeley, and I knew that she had killed her mother 3 years before. And I knew that she had done a very good job of concealing that death 3 years ago to make it look like an accidental death, not murder.
Bierce approached Thomas Rogers, the head of the trial staff at the DA's office in Alameda County. After hearing the details of Bierce's investigation, he too became determined to bring the case to justice.
I made a commitment that I was going to try the case. In our business, many of the cases are much more interesting than what we see on television. There's a tremendous human drama involved. For anybody who is curious, you have a woman who's 55 years old with no record. Why did she kill her best friend?
This was the question puzzling investigators for over a year.
Hello, Al. Tom Rogers.
But as Bierce and Rogers discovered, it all came down to money.
When he went through the receipts, you should be done.
Christine Lloyd had been cashing her mother's civil service pension checks. And the men believed that once Virginia Bailey confronted Christine about the house foreclosure, it was only a matter of time before authorities began looking into Christine's finances and found out about Myrtle Lloyd. But despite all the circumstantial evidence, the clear motive of embezzlement, and the testimony of the handwriting analyst, it would be a tough case to try. There was no cause of death, no eyewitnesses, no smoking gun. D.A. Rogers decided to take one last look at the pile of evidence Inspector Bierce had uncovered. After weeks of combing through the findings, he was convinced. The final link to justice and punishment would come down to a tiny piece of living evidence.
The most compelling evidence was the entomology evidence. If we did not have the entomology evidence, we never would have been able to prove the case.
The fact that maggots will only feed on a dead body was the only piece of conclusive proof that Virginia was dead long before the fire. But it was the proof that made Rogers feel comfortable enough to try the case. And it was the one hole in Christine Lloyd's story which all the other lies would come rushing through. She placed herself in the house during the time of Virginia's death and the time of the fire. This would be the crux of the prosecutor's case. That Christine Lloyd had committed Virginia Bailey's murder and spent 2 weeks manufacturing an elaborate crime scene to cover her tracks. In July of 1995, 1 year after the fire that killed her best friend, Virginia Bailey, Christine Lloyd was once again arrested.
Are there any weapons?
Right to remain silent.
But this time, she was headed to trial. Once again, Lloyd refused to speak to the man who had made it his mission to put her behind bars.
You're getting one more chance at your side of the story. It was a pretty quiet trip coming in.
But by now, Bierce and D.A. Rogers had fully patched together what had happened to Virginia Bailey and the events leading up to her murder.
Assuming you're not going to be talking to me.
Near trial, we re-investigated and were able to prove through statements and circumstantial evidence that clearly Christine Lloyd had killed her mother. And that the motive then for killing Virginia Bailey was to avoid a re-examination of the mother's death.
Virginia Bailey had no idea her dear friend Christine Lloyd had been embezzling from her. So when she came home on the afternoon of June 13th, 1994, to find a registered foreclosure note from her bank, Virginia was undoubtedly surprised and angry.
She panicked. She phoned Christine and she said, you know, you're my financial advisor. What is the deal here? There was a 3.5-minute call to Christine's house in Martinez.
At that point, Christine knew she was caught, and it wouldn't be long before everyone knew the deadly secrets she had been hiding for 3 years. She showed up at the house intent on murder.
The bank, they're foreclosing on the house. They wrote the checks out in paper.
Using a blunt object, she brutally struck Virginia until she was dead. It would now be up to a jury to determine if Christine Lloyd was the murderous woman Al Bierce was convinced she was. But Al Bierce also wanted justice for Myrtle Lloyd, and uncovered that Christine was the sole beneficiary of a $100,000 life insurance policy. So as Christine sat in jail awaiting trial for one murder, the investigation continued on the second. This was enough to indict once again for murder. Driven by the same greed, Christine had inflicted a beating on her elderly mother. Christine Lloyd was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of arson. She received 2 consecutive life sentences. In planning, executing, and covering up their crimes, sometimes murderers think too much. Sometimes it is this over-planning that leads investigators to their front doors. And as long as those investigators are listening for clues, they'll have the forensic resources to back up their hunches. And clever killers will continue to be brought to justice. An abandoned car outside Philadelphia brings heartbreak to a family and terror to a community. A young woman is dead, the killer gone. But the marks of his passage remain. South of Chicago, another mystery. A missing boy. A frantic search. Heartbreaking clues. Investigators struggle to find the boy and whoever took him. When victims are young, crime hurts that much more. And when the criminals are repeat offenders, it's a cruel turn of fate. Authorities are dedicated to solving these crimes and terminating the careers of those who are out to kill. At about 2 a.m. on June 20th, 1996, an off-duty ambulance crewman spotted a car abandoned on the road. It was parked on an exit ramp off Interstate 476, heading west away from Philadelphia. The car was running, and the headlights and radio were on. But no one was inside. The driver radioed 911. The emergency operator took the report, then dispatched 2 nearby troopers to the scene.
We will send a trooper out to the scene as soon as possible.
State Police Lieutenant Lenny Bandy was notified and headed to the highway interchange.
When the car was discovered, it was found with its driver's door open, the headlights were on, the radio was playing, and the engine was running. That was unusual to me.
It looked like a crime. The State Police Forensic Services Unit, headed by Corporal Alan Stewart, arrived at the scene.
Well, there was blood in front of the vehicle, and at that point I knew it was urgent to get everything started as quickly as possible.
At the front of the car was a tire iron. Near it, a small pool that appeared to be blood.
It was more than just an abandoned vehicle to me at that point. And it was a missing person investigation. It certainly was under suspicious circumstances with the presence of the tire iron and blood in front of the car and the hasty manner in which it appeared the occupant had left.
We collected the blood with the Q-tip, packaged it. We sent that out to the lab for DNA purposes.
Careful not to upset any potential evidence, they searched the car's interior and found a backpack. It appeared to be a college student's, but there was no identification inside. The car was registered to a woman in Brookhaven, Pennsylvania. Investigators learned the car was driven by her 22-year-old daughter, Amy.
1974.
While troopers spoke with Amy's parents, the crime scene processing continued.
One of the troopers had seen a pair of panties and shoes laying on a hillside. We went back to retrieve the pair of panties and shoes at that location.
Amy's mother later identified the shoes as her daughter's. It was looking more and more like a forcible abduction. Next to the clothing, troopers spotted a distinct tire impression, which was photographed.
Upon completion of the photographs, then we used dental stone to cast the tire impression.
The impression was sent to the crime lab. Amy's parents were worried. They knew the effects of crime firsthand.
Her father was a police officer. Her mother was an emergency room nurse. We wanted to do everything in our power to bring this young girl home safely to her family.
They had been out of town and hadn't seen their daughter in several days, but knew that Amy had planned to go out with friends that night. Her parents gave a description of their 22-year-old daughter, including the tattoo on her ankle.
If you don't mind, I'd like to keep this picture so I can distribute it.
Do you want others?
As the APB went out for the missing college student, the Philadelphia area press jumped on the story.
She'll be right out for you, sir.
By morning, the media coverage brought forward Amy's friends, who had been with her the night before.
We were trying to retrace Amy's whereabouts, reconstruct her activities from the time that she was last heard from to the time that her car was found.
All of Amy's friends had the same story. It was an impromptu reunion of high school friends. They talked for a few hours, catching up. Friends said when Amy left the bar around 1:30 a.m., she was alone. No one had seen or heard from her since.
Tell me what happened.
At Delaware County's Criminal Investigation Division, Detective Sergeant Greg Seltzer and Detective Charles List were shocked to hear their friend's daughter was missing.
I've known Paul for a number of years. I know Amy's mother, so we wanted to do anything we could to help with the investigation.
Detective Sergeant Seltzer contacted their superior, who immediately put them on the case.
I went to the captain, who was the chief of county detectives, and explained to him that we have a police officer's daughter that's been missing.
While search teams looked for Amy, a task force gathered at the state police barracks to plan the intense investigation.
We utilized what's known as victimology. We wanted to learn about Amy and her behaviors and the patterns of her conduct. We learned that she was a regular kid.
Amy Willard was a star athlete at George Mason University, a responsible student taking summer classes, no ties to anything or anyone dangerous. By 5 p.m., 15 hours had passed with no sign of the missing girl.
While we were in the meeting, they received a call from Philadelphia police that they had a body and it matched the description of Amy.
Children had discovered the nude body that afternoon in an isolated area of North Philadelphia. It was 25 miles from Amy's car. There was no purse or clothing on or near the body, but everyone knew who it was.
That's Amy.
The physical characteristics, the size, the height and weight, it was consistent with the description given to us by Amy's family, and most specifically the presence of a tattoo on her right ankle, which was consistent with the tattoo that Amy had.
Finding Amy this way was difficult for everyone involved. Before the autopsy, her parents confirmed their daughter's identity. The medical examiner determined the young woman had died of multiple blunt force trauma to the head and body. It was a vicious attack.
When we were at the autopsy, we noticed there was a pattern on her right side that was in the shape of squares with the X's in the middle of the squares that were actually burned into her right side.
The burn pattern was so distinctive, investigators believed if they could find its source, they could find the killer. The medical examiner also recovered semen and believed the victim was sexually assaulted. The fluid and samples of Amy's blood were sent to the lab for testing. At the Pennsylvania State Police Regional Crime Lab in Lima, experts determined the blood found near the car was Amy Willard's. The seminal fluid recovered from the victim was also analyzed. Using a technique known as PCR, examiners made millions of copies of an isolated DNA strand until it was large enough to decipher. Once they could read it, they put together a genetic profile of the possible assailant. But they got no hits on any DNA database. Still, it was crucial evidence, according to Delaware County Assistant District Attorney Dan McDevitt.
We had the genetic profile of the killer. We just didn't have a name to go along with that profile.
They also believed they had his tire print. Lieutenant Dennis Luce, commander of training and technical support at the crime lab, examined the tire cast.
The cast that we were looking at was a tire that had 4 grooves and 5 raised areas. So when we did our search of the database, we were only looking at tires that had the same number of grooves. We determined from the database that it was a Firestone FR440 tire.
Although it was a common tire, it might help confirm or eliminate a suspect. Investigators also needed to examine the burn pattern from the victim's body.
We believed if we could find the source of that pattern injury, we could find out who the killer was.
From the burn pattern, a pathologist tried to determine the shape and dimensions of the object that made it.
Although he couldn't tell us what the object was, he drew a picture of what the object looked like.
The investigative team had a great deal of evidence: the burn pattern, the tire track, and the genetic profile of the killer. But they had no idea who he was. Knowing why Amy stopped her car might help identify the killer.
I have no idea.
Both mom and dad assured us the only reason she would stop, she would stop if a police officer had pulled her over.
A police impersonator, a frightening possibility, but a real one. As the first few crucial days of the investigation passed with no solid leads, the law enforcement community grew frustrated.
It was a virtual whodunit. It was a needle in a haystack.
A vicious killer had stolen the life of this well-loved young woman, the daughter of a cop and a nurse, one of their own. And the investigators of Delaware County would never give up until they found him. In Delaware County, Pennsylvania, state police and county detectives were investigating the brutal homicide of 22-year-old college student Amy Willard. Many knew Amy, the daughter of a local police officer and a nurse. Investigators had good physical evidence, including a distinctive burn pattern on the body and the DNA profile of the suspected killer, but no suspects. One theory is that Amy stopped that night because someone impersonating a cop made her pull over. Detective Charles List sought information on known police impersonators.
I was surprised at how many police impersonators there were out there. We had a lot of interviews to do.
Many of those interviewed had solid alibis. But not everyone did.
No, I do not own Black Honda.
One suspect had a record of trying to pull over women.
You weren't on Route 1 at the entrance of Route 1?
Investigators could not corroborate his alibi for the night Amy was killed. And he worked near the place where the body was found. Detectives got a search warrant that allowed them to take a sample of the suspect's blood to compare his DNA against the DNA collected from the victim. State Police Lieutenant Lenny Bandy knew the genetic material was their greatest ally.
That was the most conclusive piece of evidence that we can use to include or exclude someone in our investigation.
The sample was sent to the lab for processing.
Yes.
The suspect in question also drove a car that could support the type of tire that left the impression near Amy's clothing. Examiners compared the tire cast from the scene to an inked impression of the suspect's tires. But reported no match. DNA experts eventually reported similar results. No match. The suspect was cleared.
There were numerous calls, tips that were made by the public. We were overwhelmed early on.
Despite checking every lead, they came up with nothing. Months passed. Frustration grew. Detective Charles List and Detective Sergeant Greg Seltzer eliminated every known police impersonator. They had no idea why Amy pulled off the road. Then, late on the night of May 29, 1997, almost a year after Amy Willard's death, 19-year-old nursing student Patty Jordan had just left a nightclub in Philadelphia and was driving home.
I noticed that a car was coming behind me with their headlights speeding up behind me. So I just kept my eye on him and I switched lanes, and then he switched lanes with me, and then I did it again, and so did he, and I sped up, and so did he. I slowed down, and so did he.
The daughter of a Philadelphia police officer, Patty knew she needed to find her father.
I thought to myself, I was going to the 2nd Police District. That's the police district by my house. And then I would just pull in there and call my dad.
Off the interstate, she stopped at a red light.
And that's when he just slowly came up from behind me. I could see him, I could see his headlights, and I thought to myself, this guy's gonna hit my car. And that's when he hit my car. And then that's when I was like, oh my God, what is this guy doing? He kept motioning for me to pull over, just to pull over. I was mad and I was scared.
But Patty Jordan was not going to pull over.
And I just thought, I'm getting this guy's plate number. I'm gonna tell my dad.
Eventually, the man turned and drove away, but not before Patty got the plate.
I said it over and over in my head, and as soon as I came home and saw my brother, I ran to the kitchen and wrote it down.
Sergeant John Jordan is Patty's father.
The murder of Amy Willard had been in the news, so I entered the tag into the National Crime Information Center, NCIC, and it came back to an Arthur Bomar. And I noticed that the registration was to a Ford Escort.
But Patty said the man was driving a Honda. Sergeant Jordan also found out that Arthur Bomar was a convicted murderer who was wanted for a parole violation in Nevada.
And the more I thought about that and what had happened to my daughter, I just had to call Delaware County. Detective Sergeant Seltzer and his partner, Detective Charlie List, spoke to my daughter. And I could see the look on their face. I'll never forget the look on both their faces as they listened to Patty recount what happened to her.
Patty's description of the driver who bumped her matched that of Arthur Bomar.
Can you tell us what happened?
Although the plate was registered to a Ford Escort, Patty said she was sure it was a dark-colored Honda behind her.
I-95, and that's when I noticed that
The plate might have been switched. It was their best lead by far.
It was the entire case. It was the entire case. There was nothing, I can't describe how important that was. Just for her to grab that tag number and tell us. We wanted very much to speak with Mr. Bomar.
At first, they could not find the parolee. But after such a long and frustrating investigation, the investigators were surprised at how quickly the case took off.
We were a year into the investigation and following up every lead we could. Arthur Bomar comes into the picture within 3 days. Arthur Bomar is in custody.
Detective Sergeant Seltzer and Detective List went to interview Bomar at the Lower Marion Police Station, where he was being held on burglary charges. Bomar denied knowing anything about Amy Willard and said he had never been to the part of North Philadelphia where her body was found.
And you're still saying that you were...
He admitted he'd been to the bar Amy went to the night of her murder, but claimed he was not there that night. He was at a birthday party.
All right, Mr. Bomar.
After speaking with family members, we found that it was a lie, that he wasn't at the birthday party.
Securing a search warrant, investigators took samples of Bomar's cheek cells and hair to compare his DNA to the DNA recovered from the victim. The analysis at the busy State Police Crime Lab would take a few days. But because Bomar was in jail on another charge, Assistant District Attorney Dan McDevitt knew they had time.
Okay, Charlie.
A Montgomery County judge denied Bomar bail.
So there was no chance of him being back out on the street before we concluded our investigation. We had a lot of forensic evidence, and we wanted to carefully put all that evidence together because we only get one shot at him in court, and we wanted to make it a good one.
Police searched the area near where Bomar was arrested for burglary. Officers found a car with the same plate numbers Patty Jordan had given to her father. The plate was registered to a Ford Escort, but it was on a black Honda, just as Patty described. Technicians later found no evidence in the Honda related to the Amy Willard case. They needed to find that Escort. The case was heating up, but mysteries remained. The missing car, the peculiar burn pattern, and whether or not DNA would clear this suspect. After a year-long search, the investigators of Delaware County hoped they could solve these mysteries and find some degree of justice for a murdered young woman. Near Philadelphia, 22-year-old Amy Willard was abducted, sexually assaulted, and killed, left with a distinct burn pattern on the side of her body. A year later, Pennsylvania investigators had a suspect in custody. Arthur Bomar said he had nothing to do with Amy's death and claimed he wasn't at the bar where Amy was last seen alive. But detectives tracked down Bomar's girlfriend, and she had a different story. She was in hiding and fearful of Bomar. She said Bomar told her he was going to the bar in question on the night of the murder.
He started talking about.
Bomar confessed to his girlfriend that he watched Amy Willard leave the bar and followed her. He forced her to pull over, though the girlfriend didn't know how. Bomar said he then knocked Amy unconscious. He took her to North Philadelphia, where he raped and killed her. The girlfriend said Bomar was driving his Ford Escort that night. The statement of the girlfriend was a major break, but investigators needed evidence to back it up in court. Delaware County Detective Charles List and Detective Sergeant Greg Seltzer believed the key was Bomar's Ford Escort.
His vehicle is very important because at some point Amy was in that car.
Absolutely.
We went to an insurance company and found they had been in an accident shortly after Amy's abduction.
The detectives learned the car was towed to a salvage lot.
We obtained a search warrant. We were hoping to find some type of blood, hair, fiber that would link Amy Willard to Arthur Bomar.
When the tow truck lifted the car, investigators were stunned. The oil pan had a familiar pattern. They believed it was the object that burned Amy's body. At the State Police Garage, the Forensic Services Unit processed the car.
What's that?
On the passenger side door panel, they found what appeared to be dried blood.
I'll take it down to the lab.
They removed the oil pan so it could be compared to photos of the burn pattern on the victim's body.
Yeah, that's it.
The technicians also collected the car's tires to check them against the tire impression from the scene of the abduction. Corporal Alan Stewart was part of the Forensic Services Unit.
We sent the oil pan to a pattern expert from the Armed Services, who then in fact did match the oil pan to the pattern that was on Amy's body.
Lieutenant Dennis Luce compared the tire cast from the crime scene to the print of a Firestone FR 440 tire from Bomar's car.
We were able to determine by comparing the track to the suspect tire that both had the same amount of wear.
Sergeant Luce, I finished looking at that tire track that you sent in, that tire you sent in. It's consistent with the track from the crime scene.
Serology expert Cecilia Cassiola examined the door panel and found Amy Willard's blood.
Finding the victim's blood in the suspect's car puts the victim in the suspect's car.
But the most important forensic evidence came with the DNA results. It was a match. Assistant District Attorney Dan McDevitt.
The DNA evidence was irrefutable here. There was a 5 billion and 1 chance that Arthur Bomar was not the person who contributed the DNA found during the autopsy. So that obviously was a foundation of our case. In addition, we were able to link the car he drove to the thermal injury on Amy's body. Amy's blood was found behind the door panel in his car. The tires on Arthur Bomar's car left tire track impressions at the abduction scene.
It was enough to convince the jury. On October 1st, 1998, Arthur Bomar was convicted of first-degree murder, rape, and kidnapping. He was sentenced to death. Amy's family has fought for the laws to be changed to keep offenders behind bars, but the law did not pass in time to protect an Illinois family. Aroma Park is an hour south of Chicago. On an afternoon in 1995, Micah Moulton got nervous when her 10-year-old son Christopher did not come home from fishing at 5 o'clock as expected. It was not long before she had a feeling something was terribly wrong.
I jumped up and I looked at the clock. It said 5:22, and I knew immediately I needed to go find him. I had to go find him at that moment.
Leaving her other kids at the house in case Christopher returned, she went down to the Aroma Park boat ramp on the Kankakee River, where Christopher normally fished.
I walked around the area, I called his name, started yelling out for him.
After more than an hour of searching, Micah called the Kankakee County Sheriff's Department. Under Sheriff Brad O'Keefe worried when he heard where the boy was last seen.
The speed of that river, we have a lot of drownings. A lot of people fall in and disappear in that river, so that makes it dangerous in itself.
Rich, not a Aroma Park Boat Club right away. You got a missing 10-year-old.
Micah told Deputy Rich Burns about Christopher. She had already checked with all of his friends. No one had seen him since 4:30 at the boat launch.
It was very unusual for him to do this, for him not to return home on time, and we knew it was very important to get the ball rolling, to get the search started.
He's 10 years old. And I said, well, I'm going to go in the woods and look for him. He said, just wait. He said, hold on. And he made a couple of radio calls, and the next thing I knew, there were search dogs and search teams and the fire department out there.
We didn't know if he had fallen into the river or if he had walked off, if he was just lost.
Right away, they threw every resource into the search.
All the local police agencies sent people. So we had fire departments from Aroma Park and Kankakee. They had the boats in the water doing the search. Once they knew what we were looking for, a lot of the citizens came up and volunteered.
They briefed the search parties, describing Christopher, his clothing, his bicycle. The searchers were instructed not to touch anything they found.
We don't know what happened at this point, so we're searching.
Any evidence should be collected by trained evidence technicians.
Anything you find, call Detective Bertrand. We're going to process it and handle it as evidence. Detective Bertrand will come out and collect it. All right? So everybody go
They had to
over here and line up
organize
along these woods.
and stay organized.
They have an assistant in the command center who keeps track of who's where and who's doing what searches.
Fire department personnel checked the water and riverbanks. Search dogs tried to track the young boy. Everyone prayed they would find Christopher quickly. Investigators interviewed anyone they could locate at the boat launch.
Sit over there. Did you see Christopher Meyer? Yes, miss. What did you guys see? Tell me everything you saw.
Two boys said they saw Chris with a man that afternoon, according to Kankakee County Administrative Chief Joe Mulcahy.
The man had a fishing tackle box with him, and in the box was some lures that were not appropriate for this area. It was saltwater lures, and the man did tell them that he was originally from this area, but had just came back from Florida.
The boys said there was a fillet knife in the box with the lures. They saw Christopher and the man leave the riverbank together. They could give only a vague description. A white male, tall, a mustache.
He had like all this neat stuff.
And we were concerned that there may be a possible abduction at that point.
No one slept.
We had detectives in here fielding calls all night. We had people searching the woods. We searched that woods 20 times, hoping that we would find something.
But that night, they didn't. Local news stations ran the story, broadcasting descriptions of Christopher and the unknown man he was seen with, and asking for more help. At the Sheriff's Emergency Operations Center, deputies and volunteers fielded calls. Many were tips suggesting they look into certain men as possible suspects. Investigators followed up on every tip, while the search continued, firemen dragging the river bottom. More than 18 hours had passed with no sign of Christopher. Then, the next morning, searchers spotted something in the water. A child's sneaker. Micah identified it as Christopher's.
We now have a shoe in the water. Chances are better now that he's in the water or something's there, so we got to intensify the search there.
Dive teams searched for any sign of the boy or his bike.
It would overhear people talking about, you know, any news, did they find a body? And a couple of times I lost it and said there's not going to be a body, they're going to bring home Christopher. And I just kept a positive outlook on it, because I couldn't ever let myself think or feel that he wasn't going to come home.
Those searching for Christopher would not give up either. That little boy was out there somewhere, and they needed to bring him home. 10-year-old Christopher Meyer was last seen with an unknown man near the Kankakee River in Aroma Park, Illinois. Investigators did not know if Christopher had been abducted or if he fell in the river where they had recovered one of the boy's sneakers. Micah Moulton is Christopher's mother.
I felt there would be, everything was going to be okay, or eventually I was going to wake up, that this was just a really bad dream.
But it was no dream.
I got something here.
On the second day, one search team spotted something.
Oh boy.
Christopher's bicycle. It appeared someone had carried the bike deep into the woods and tried to conceal it, according to Undersheriff Brad O'Keefe.
It's that much more critical. We're not searching anymore for a lost child. We're not searching anymore for a drowned child.
Now they knew someone had taken Christopher. Several witnesses said they saw Christopher pushing his bike with a white male who had a goatee. They said at one point the man was standing by the open trunk of a gray four-door sedan that had fishing rods in the back window.
Just a short.
He had a fillet knife in a leather case in his back pocket. Some of the witnesses worked with a police artist to create a composite sketch of the man.
Great.
Investigators released the sketch to the media.
Once the picture was out, everybody had somebody in mind. So we were getting all kinds of tips and clues on who it might be.
Deputies followed up with every caller to the tip line.
We took them a composite sketch and asked them to look at it and identify it.
Yeah, that's Bus.
One name came up more than any other, Timothy Buss.
When was the last time you saw him?
Fairly new to the community, Micah Moulton did not know the name.
No, we just need to ask him.
And I remember somebody coming in and saying, Timothy Buss, oh my God, I can't believe he's out. And they kept going on, and I said, who is like, Timothy Buss? Who is this Tim Buss? Who is this Timothy Buss? And nobody would tell me.
The investigators all knew Buss. In 1981, Timothy Buss had abducted and murdered a 5-year-old girl in nearby Bradley, Illinois. He was found guilty and sentenced to 25 years. But he had been recently paroled. Lieutenant Larry Osenga of the Kankakee City Police Department's Violent Crimes Task Force offered his squad's assistance. They asked around Buss's old neighborhood.
The neighbors advised us, yes, he was in the community.
Kankakee police learned Buss was now living in Joliet, Illinois, a western suburb of Chicago. Lieutenant Osenga called Joliet Police Department. Joliet agreed to check on Buss's apartment.
So Joliet assisted us. We went to where his residence was. He was not there at the time.
But the Joliet police sat and waited. The searches in the Aroma Park area kept on as another terrible night passed. Then, 2 days after Christopher disappeared, the Joliet surveillance unit spotted a man approaching Buss's apartment. It looked like the suspect. He was alone. Joliet contacted the Kankakee officers, who immediately drove up to the city.
You did Sparrow place? Yeah, about an hour now. Did you see him go anywhere? Sure he's in, right?
They checked the apartment,
When was the last time you saw him?
but no one answered. The place seemed deserted.
Hey, what's going on?
A neighbor noticed the police and told them she had seen Buss go out the back door.
He ran out of his apartment, jumped in his car with his headlights off, and he drove off at a high rate of speed and got away from us. We began a perimeter search trying to locate him, and we were not able to locate him.
A search of the apartment yielded no sign of the missing boy. APBs went out to law enforcement throughout the greater Chicago area with descriptions of Timothy Buss and his car.
Kankakee County Sheriff's Office, can I help you?
People began recognizing the sketch. A motel clerk in Braidwood, Illinois, called to say she thought Buss was staying there. Kankakee County sent Deputy Brady Bertrand to the motel in Braidwood, 25 miles south of Joliet.
At about 8 o'clock in the morning, Buss come out of the hotel and walked directly over to a dumpster in the parking lot of the hotel. He threw a pair of boots in the dumpster.
Deputy Bertrand radioed for assistance.
I'm just going to stick with them.
Then he followed the suspect.
He initially got on I-55 northbound, which leads into the city of Chicago, but he ended up getting off a short distance later and driving to Wilmington and pulling down by the river and talking to some fishermen down there.
Deputy Bertrand waited for backup to arrive. While he did, Kankakee County detectives Ron Kilman and Randy Hartman responded to the Braidwood Motel to collect the evidence.
The boots were retrieved. We're not sure what evidence that is going to be connected to, but he apparently put them there for a reason. So we secured them, whether there was possible blood located on them, hairs or fibers.
The boots were sent to the lab for analysis. The Kankakee officers hoped they could get Buss to talk.
Yeah.
He was very antsy and looking around as if he wanted to get away from there, but he had no place to go.
Every time something goes wrong, you guys are going to start coming to me. Yeah, we are.
At first, the parolee was evasive, not wanting to talk.
And we'll get it worked out.
But eventually, he agreed to come to the Kankakee County Sheriff's Department for an interview.
This ain't right.
At the station, Buss denied knowing anything about Christopher Meyer. His lawyer arrived to discuss investigators' request for a consent to search Buss's car. Against the lawyer's advice, Buss signed the consent form.
I have nothing to hide, nothing at all.
At At the Sheriff's Department garage, Detectives Hartman and Kilman processed the suspect's car.
As a crime scene detective, we're basically putting a story together. And if you can do your job well enough, then you find that evidence that's able to tell you that story.
In the trunk, they discovered a car dent puller that appeared to have blood on it. There was also a tire iron and a tackle box like the one described by the boys who last saw Christopher. There was no fillet knife inside.
As we removed the items one at a time, then we were able to observe on the carpeting itself underneath the tools that there was a considerable amount of blood.
It was a difficult find, but an important one.
If in fact this was going to turn into a homicide, we needed to be able to put the boy and the suspect together.
Inside, the technicians also found a claw hammer.
It had dirt in the claw portion. What that told us was somebody's been doing some digging with this hammer.
On the passenger seat, the technicians recovered several head hairs. Like the other evidence, the hairs would be sent to forensics experts at the Illinois State Police Crime Lab. They had a suspect in custody and haunting evidence of foul play.
We still don't know where Chris is. We don't know if Chris is maybe hurt and bleeding. We were hoping we would find him stashed in a cabin or something along the river. So we never gave up hope that he would still be alive.
In 1995, Kankakee County, Illinois investigators were searching for 10-year-old Christopher Meyer, who was abducted while fishing. Evidence technicians found blood, hairs, and a dirt-encrusted hammer in the car of Timothy Buss, who had been seen with Christopher the day the boy disappeared.
They came in. Our investigations led us to believe that you have...
Authorities arrested Buss and charged him with aggravated kidnapping.
Every time a child misses you, come, you know this ain't right. You know this ain't right.
He refused to cooperate. At the Illinois State Police Forensics Lab, DNA research coordinator William Frank examined the evidence from Buss's trunk. He would compare the blood from those items to a DNA parentage profile created from Christopher's parents and to a probable sample of the boy's DNA called a convenience standard.
The convenience standard that was used was the child's asthma inhaler.
From the swabs of the inhaler and the parents' blood samples, Frank created a genetic profile using PCR testing.
The parentage comparison from the child's parents was consistent with the inhaler.
He then checked that profile against the blood from the car.
When I compared the profile that was identified in the asthma inhaler to the profile that was identified in the blood stains from the suspect's vehicle, the two profiles matched.
They still held out hope that the boy was alive. Kankakee County Sheriff Bernie Thompson.
After Timothy Buss was in custody, we were still looking for Christopher, and there was always that hope that we would find him alive.
A few days later, a search party that included Sheriff's investigator Kenneth Ponton discovered a pair of boys' briefs and later a fishing pole and part of a T-shirt.
We called Investigator Mulcahy and gave her the description of the items and asked her to check with the missing boy's mother, which she did, and the mother was able to identify that these items belonged to her son.
3 days later, in a part of Kankakee State Park, Will County deputies made the discovery that would finally end the search. Under a piece of plywood, partially buried, was the body of a small boy. He had been stabbed more than 50 times with a thin knife. It was Christopher. Evidence technicians collected a clump of dirt containing a boot print from the gravesite. They also collected samples of the soil in the area. Hair and fiber expert Ralph Meyer compared the hairs found in Timothy Buss's car to Christopher's using a comparison microscope.
We're looking at the general appearance, the length, the distribution of the pigmentation, the fusi throughout the shaft, ovoid bodies.
The hairs were microscopically consistent in every regard. Geologist Ken Knight examined the soil samples taken from the gravesite and the soil found on the claw hammer.
We tried to determine if the knowns and the unknowns had the same characteristics, the same amount of crystals or mineral particles, same colors, same angularity of those particles, the same general type of botanical material.
Again, a match.
The fact that the soil from the hammer is consistent with a mixture of the soil samples from the gravesite indicates that the hammer was used to actually dig the grave.
Some of that soil held a partial impression of a boot print. Forensic scientist Robert Hunton compared boots bust throughout at the motel to that impression.
I made a cast of that particular portion of the boot that had a similar pattern to the piece of soil. I compared those side by side. I was able to say that that impression could have been made by that portion, that small area of the right boot.
Investigators hoped more definitive proof would come from the DNA lab. William Frank checked samples from the victim's femur against the evidence he already had.
The genetic profile for the femur bone matches the genetic marker profile identified for the child's inhaler and also matches the bloodstains identified in the trunk from the suspect's car.
The forensic evidence proved that Timothy Buss abducted Christopher Meyer. He assaulted the boy, stabbed him repeatedly, then buried him in the woods. Buss was found guilty of kidnapping and murder and was sentenced to death. That sentence was commuted to life in January 2003, but this time there will be no chance of parole. Christopher's mother, Micah Moulton.
The anger and the sadness and the grief and all was so overwhelming, but I knew I could use it in a positive way to make a difference. I want laws changed. I helped in lobbying for the No Second Chances for Murderers, Rapists, and Child Molesters law, also known as Amy's Law.
That law, named for murdered college student Amy Willard, seeks to prevent the most violent criminals from being released on parole. It was passed by the U.S. Congress in 2000.